Hi everybody. A couple of people requested an ArrayList review video, so here it is. I'm going to cover the basic things that you'd want to do with an ArrayList. And ArrayLists are really very similar in structure to arrays. They're both lists. They both let you store a sequence of variables. So I'm going to cover how do you create an ArrayList to hold something. I'll cover how do you get values out of the list. I'll cover how do you put values into the list. How do you get the size of the list, and how do you loop over the list to do something with every single variable inside the list. And those are kind of the basic building blocks that you'd want to put together for any program that involves the list. So if you remember about arrays, an array is a list of variables, and each of the variables is just like if you had declared a regular variable, only now you refer to the variable by its location in the list, and the locations always start with 0. And I'd suggested before that a set of lockers was a good kind of model to use to imagine what is an array like. So you might have a bunch of lockers with numbers, and then similarly your array, we usually think of this way, as a bunch of boxes, each of which represents a variable. And then down here, if you the set of lockers, the array, has a name. Here I've called it R. So R location 0 is the way that you read or write to this first variable in the list. So if I said, what is R location 0, that would be 2, and so on. So array lists are very similar with a couple of differences. So the first important difference is when you create an array, you say how many variables you want to be in your array when you create it. So here, for example, I'm creating an integer array, and I'm creating it to hold 100 integers. Here I'm creating a string array to hold 5,000 strings. For an array list, you always create it empty. So I say, give me a new array list that could hold integers, but when I create it, its size is 0. And as you put things into the list, the length of the list grows to accommodate the things you're trying to put into it. And you can also remove things from the list, and the size of the list will shrink. So an array list you can think of as being a dynamic array, and that's actually why they were invented. It was to make arrays be a little bit more flexible and easier to use. Another thing you might be noticing is here I've written int, which is the primitive data type for storing integers. Over here I did not write int. I've written capital I integer, which is the object version of int. I don't want to get very deeply into why that exists in Java or kind of what's going on, but for right now, the important thing to know is that whenever you're creating an array list, the data type for what kind of variable your list holds always has to be an object. So if you want to store something like int, you have to use integer. String is already an object, so that's the same. Here, Boolean with a lowercase is primitive. Boolean with an uppercase is the object version of Boolean. And most often, of course, you're going to have your own objects. So I'm imagining that we declared a person class to define a person object. And so you could make an array list of person objects, which I have called people. Like if you were going to make the school loop website, for example, you would have each class store a list of people, and that would be the roster of the class. Okay, if you'd like to follow along, I would recommend that. So here I am in IntelliJ. I'm going to do sort of a basic set of things that I imagine you might want to do. And we'll do it first with an array, and then on this panel we'll do it with an array list. So I'm going to create the list, fill it with random numbers, display the first and last things in the list, and then add them all up. So creating a list. For an array, let's make it an int array. So I'll call it R, and then I'd say new int, and then let's have there be 10 things in it. If I'm going to fill it with numbers, I want to loop over all the locations in the list. So I'd say array.length, i++. And then I'm going to generate random numbers. So I'd say int random value, and then math.random times 10, something like that. Or let's do 100. And I haven't put this number into an array yet. So here I have to say array element I gets random val. So what that's doing is as I as the location number, and as it's going through each locker location one at a time, I'm generating the random number and saving it into location number I. So first 0, then 1, then 2, and so on. All right, so let's do just that much with array lists. So over here, if I wanted to create an array list, I'd say array list, and then inside the triangle brackets, integer is the kind of thing I want my list to hold. I'll call it R, and I'll say new array list. Okay. So, differences. Here I created it to be size 10. Here the array list can hold as much as I want, but when I create it, it's empty. So when I'm filling it with random numbers, this wouldn't make any sense. I can't say well, I can say it, but it wouldn't make any sense to say array.length loop up to the size of the array, because this pattern is for saying let's loop over every single thing that's already in the list. Right now our list is size 0, so array.size will be 0, and this won't loop at all because I is already 0, and 0 is not less than 0 here, so it will exit the loop immediately. So I don't want to loop over all the things that are already in the list. The whole point is I want to put new things in the list. So I'm going to just loop 10 times, and then the inside of this is very similar. So I'll generate a random value, only instead of saying array element I and then having an equal sign, I have to say array.add. And whatever number is here gets added to the end of the array. Array list, I should say. So you don't always have to add to the end of the array list. There are other ways to add into the middle or the beginning, but this is the most common thing that you'll do. Okay, so let's get some things out of the list. So I could say int first equals array 0, because that's location 0, that's the first thing in the list. Int last equals array, and now I have to think what's the location, what's the last valid location of my list. So it's going to be array.length minus 1, because array.length is how many things in the list, but because we start counting at 0, array length minus 1 is the location of the last thing. So if I want to do that same pattern now for an array list, I'll say int first equals array.get location 0. So that's the difference. Here, the location is in the square brackets. Here I say give me location 0 using the get method. So last, I'll say array.get, and now it's the same thing. I have to figure out what's the location of the last valid element. So I'll say array dot, you would hope that you could say length the same as arrays. You cannot. It is size. That's just one of those things that you have to be able to look up or remember if you do it enough. But because the counting starts at 0, it's the same thing. It's array.size minus 1. So there's the first and last elements. And I said we were going to print them, so I guess let's go ahead and print them. So first and last, and then here we'll do first and last. Okay, so now let's add them all up. So to add them all up, I'm going to loop over, so I'm going to create a sum variable that starts at 0, and I'm going to loop over the list. So I equals 0. Now I can say I less than array.size, because at this point in the program, I've already put the things that I want into my array list, so now I am actually looping over each of the pre-existing locations. And now I'll say sum gets sum plus array.get I. So in other words, I'm saying take the current sum right now, and then add into the sum the next number in the next location in the list. And then at the end, I can say total sum is sum. You know what, maybe it might be nice to actually see what everything in the list is. So let's do that too. So in array list, what's nice is you can just print the array list. You don't have to do anything fancy. Let's do that same thing with an array now. So instead of array.size, it's array.length. Is everything going okay here? Oh. And then instead of get, I use the square brackets. Everything else is the same. And then here for the printing. Only now I can't print array. I have to say arrays.toString array. Okay, so let's go ahead and run them. So here when I run this one, it looks like my first and last elements have worked, and then I'm not going to check this by hand, but that total sum looks reasonable. And then over here, you'll see that it does the exact same thing. Of course, the numbers are different because they're randomly generated. Okay, let me show you what's nice about array lists. I said that they're like dynamic arrays. So here after I've put my 10 numbers in, let's say I wanted to add some numbers at the very beginning. So let's add 4 numbers at the very beginning. So I can say array.add, only now I can give it the so in IntelliJ it will actually tell you. So here, index, that's like the location number. So I'm saying I want to insert some numbers at location 0, and the number I'm going to insert is I. So let's insert a fixed number. Let's insert 999. Okay, so now the first 4, so I'm going to loop 4 times. I'm going to insert the number 999 at index 0. And when you look at what it looks like now when I run it, you see that all the other numbers have kind of shifted down to accommodate these 4 that I've inserted. That's cool. That's unique to ArrayList. You can't do that with an array. So I think my advice is this. When you're planning your programs, you shouldn't be thinking in terms of the actual commands. Don't think in terms of the syntax of the commands. Instead, think about what it is that you actually want to do with the list. Because you notice the headings here are the same. Arrays and ArrayLists both let you put things into the list, takes things out of the list. You can get how many things are in the list. You can loop over the list. They're the same in all of these ways. So when you're program planning, don't try and remember, like, is it .get, is it whatever? Think at a higher level. Think about the logic of what it is that you want to do. And then once you've written the logic down, then of course you can always refer to a quick reference sheet like this to look up, wait, how do you do that with an array list? And it should all work out. The only thing that the only caveat to that is remembering that array lists are a little bit more flexible than arrays. So if you were trying to like insert things at the beginning of an array, it would be a lot more difficult. So just be aware that ArrayList has these other options. You can add into the middle somewhere if you want, or set will let you kind of overwrite a value in the middle. But other than that, they're really quite similar. So I hope this has helped. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to record more videos. Thank you very much.